If this doesn't shock you, nothing will. The dog stopped breathing before Mason did. Not literally. But the instant Ghost locked into that rigid pointing stance at the edge of the ridge, everything living in the wind seemed to hold still with him. The German shepherd stood on a slab of wet stone with one front paw lifted, muzzle aimed across the ravine toward a black opening in the mountain. Rain drifted through pine branches in thin silver lines. Instead, Ghost smelled the cave. And he would not stop pointing at it. Mason Reeve lowered the firewood from his shoulder and let it thump into the mud beside the cabin steps. "Ghost!" The dog did not turn. Ghost always checked Mason's voice. If he was refusing to look away now, instinct had overruled obedience. Wind scraped down the ridge. The remote cave sat across the ravine, half hidden behind hanging moss and broken rock. Mason had noticed it once when he bought the cabin and then deliberately forgotten it. But now Ghost stood facing the cave like a carved warning. Mason stepped off the porch and moved toward him slowly, boots sinking into soaked needles. "What do you have?" Ghost's ears stayed forward. His tail was level, not wagging, not tucked. Alert. Tense. That was wrong too. Because Ghost was the one thing Mason had rescued after the mission that ruined everything. The one living thread left from a night he still couldn't think about all the way through without his hands remembering blood before his mind remembered names. Now that Faith was pointing at the cave. Then Ghost barked once. Short. Hard. Urgent. Mason's pulse changed. Not fear exactly. Alignment. The old internal shift that took him from tired cabin owner to watchful operator in less than a breath. His spine straightened. His eyes narrowed. Distances started measuring themselves. The ravine. The tree line. The path down. The shelf of rock leading toward the cave. He hated how quickly that man returned. Ghost did not move. Mason followed the line of the dog's muzzle to the cave again. From here it looked dead. A black mouth under stone, wet from runoff, ringed with roots. Nothing more. Then lightning flickered far behind the mountains. But the brief white blink caught something inside the cave mouth. Not eyes. Not reflection from water. Metal. Mason went still. Ghost growled low in his throat. He bent, picked up the binoculars from the porch table, and found the cave mouth through dripping branches. At first, he saw only shadow. Then the image sharpened. The metal wasn't random debris. It looked like a straight edge. Vertical. Too clean for the mountain. Ghost barked again. This time, there was frustration in it. Mason lowered the binoculars and looked at the dog. Ghost broke stance at last, but only to pace 3 tight circles, return to the exact same rock, and point again even harder than before, trembling with contained urgency. The dog was not merely interested. He was insisting. Mason let out a breath through his nose. "You're not letting this go." As if in answer, Ghost suddenly snapped his head toward the left side of the ravine and barked twice into the trees. Mason spun. Nothing. Only wet trunks, fog gathering between them, and the distant rush of runoff. But the sensation arrived anyway, that crawling certainty he remembered from alleyways overseas and dead streets at dawn. Eyes on him. He swept the tree line once. No movement. No figure. No second sound. When he looked back, Ghost was already pointing toward the cave again. That decided it. Mason grabbed the pack hanging by the cabin door and began loading without wasted motion. Flashlight. Spare batteries. Rope. Knife. Compact med kit. 1 water bottle. 2 flares. The old folding pry bar he had not touched in over a year. Ghost paced beside him, quiet now, but radiating pressure. "You win," Mason muttered. "We take a look and come back before dark." Ghost whined once. Impatience. The narrow game trail down from the cabin had been slick even before the rain. Now it was a ribbon of mud and broken roots curling toward the ravine floor through cedar and fir. Mason moved carefully at first, then faster as his body remembered how to balance under uncertainty. Ghost stayed ahead, then behind, then ahead again, never wandering, always checking, always returning to point across the stream whenever the cave vanished behind brush. A boot print. Fresh enough that rain had softened it but not erased it. He crouched instantly. Deep tread. Not local hiking gear. Still holding shape. Maybe made within the last few hours. The print faced uphill, away from the ravine, as if someone had come from the direction of the cave and climbed toward the service road above the property. Ghost stopped and stared down at it, with a low rumble in his chest. Mason scanned the ground and found a second print, then a third, all climbing away from the ravine in a slightly staggered line. One impression dragged on the right side. Injury. Weight. Or someone carrying something. He rose and moved faster. At the ravine floor, cold water frothed over black stone. The usual crossing log had shifted in the storm, leaving only half its trunk wedged against boulders. Mason tested it once with his boot. Slippery. Unstable. Ghost crossed in 2 silent bounds and turned on the far bank. Pointing again. Mason stepped onto the log. It rolled. He dropped hard to one knee and caught himself on a slick branch before the stream could take his legs out from under him. Water slammed over his boot. Cold bit straight through leather. Ghost barked sharply, one step from jumping back to him. "I'm good," Mason snapped, more harshly than he meant. The dog went still. Then Mason recovered, crossed the rest of the log with slower precision, and climbed the far bank. Ghost met him halfway up and pressed his shoulder briefly against Mason's thigh before moving ahead again. Ghost only did that when Mason's breathing changed in a way the dog associated with bad memory. The cave was now less than 100 yards away. The air changed as they approached. Colder. Stiller. The smell of wet pine faded beneath mineral damp and something else, faint but chemical, like old oil or machine grease dragged through stone. Strong enough for Ghost to flatten his ears. Then he stopped dead. His body lowered. One paw lifted. Muzzle fixed. Pointing. Again. Mason followed the line and saw the second clue. A torn strip of dark fabric caught on a jag of rock near the cave mouth. He reached it in 5 careful steps, checked the ground first, then plucked the cloth free. Synthetic weave. Black. Clean cut on one side, torn on the other. Not old enough to have weathered. The kind of fabric used in tactical range shells. A memory opened without permission. Another strip of black fabric torn on chain link. Another night full of rain and shouted coordinates, and a teammate who had gone through a door before Mason could stop him. Mason clenched his jaw and shoved the memory down. Ghost growled. Not at the cave. At the ridge behind them. Mason turned in one hard motion, hand already moving toward the pistol. No one stood there. No figure. No movement. Only the path they had climbed and the dark trees beyond it. But just before the silence settled again, a rock clicked somewhere uphill, as if a boot had touched it and then withdrawn. Mason waited. Nothing followed. When he looked back, Ghost was pointing into the cave mouth so intensely that the lifted paw was trembling. "Okay," Mason whispered. He drew the flashlight, but didn't switch it on yet. Daylight still bled weakly through the cloud cover, enough to see the first few feet inside. Stone floor. Narrow entrance. Moisture dripping from the ceiling. No smell of bear or cat. The metal edge he had glimpsed from the cabin sat deeper inside than he first thought, straight and narrow in the dark. Not natural. "Stay close." The dog leaned forward but did not enter. That stopped Mason colder than the air did. Ghost feared very little. Yet now the shepherd remained just outside the threshold, pointing into the cave. Mason switched on the flashlight. The beam cut through dripping dark, over stone, and a tight bend 10 feet in, and there, a steel bracket fixed into the wall. He stepped inside. The temperature dropped at once. Water tapped somewhere deeper, rhythmic enough to sound almost mechanical. Ghost followed one pace, then stopped again. Mason swept the light wider. Another steel bracket. Then a cable clipped to the rock and running around the bend. Every muscle in his back tightened. This was no random cave. Someone had built into it. He moved to the bend and angled the flashlight around. The beam traveled over stone floor for 6 feet, then hit a flat metal surface buried inside the cave wall itself. A door. Old, heavy, rectangular, painted once in matte gray and now half flaked by time. Mason stared. Ghost barked once, loud enough to slap echoes through the chamber. And from the other side of the door, something hit back. The blow from the other side of the steel door hit the cave like a fist inside a coffin. Ghost snapped backward with a bark that made the stone ring. Mason froze, with the flashlight fixed on the gray slab hidden in the cave wall. The sound had not been rockfall or settling metal. It had been deliberate. Something behind that door had heard the dog, heard Mason, and hit back. Then it happened again. Boom. He felt it through the soles of his boots. The cave seemed smaller. Rain at the mouth, cold control deeper in. Ghost lowered himself until his chest nearly touched the stone floor, ears flattened, muzzle aimed at the door. The growl in his throat turned rough and constant. Mason stepped sideways to clear his angle. The door was older than it had looked from the bend. Thick military gray under peeling paint. 3 hinge plates. A recessed wheel lock in the center. Beside the frame, a keypad box had been smashed inward, wires hanging dark and cut. A cable ran from a drilled channel overhead into a conduit disappearing deeper into the rock. A third impact did not come. Instead, from behind the seam, a voice slipped through. Weak. Human. Female. Please. Ghost barked once toward the entrance. Mason turned in a hard motion, beam snapping back toward daylight. A shape moved just outside the cave mouth. Not a clear body. Just the fast black shift of someone flattening against wet rock as soon as the light touched the opening. Mason killed the beam at once and dropped to one knee behind a boulder. Pistol out. Breathing shallow. Ghost pivoted with him, now growling at the entrance instead of the door. Rain hissed outside. No second step came. Mason counted in silence. 4, 6, 9. Nothing. Then the voice behind the steel came again, closer now, like the speaker had dragged herself nearer to the seam. Don't leave. The words landed harder than the impact had. Mason risked a quick flash toward the entrance. Nothing visible. No boots. No rifle. No sleeve against the rain. But the certainty remained. Someone was outside. Someone had seen him find the door, and was now waiting for him to commit to the wrong target. Ghost turned back first. One paw lifted. Muzzle fixed. Pointing at the steel again. The dog was insisting. Mason moved toward the hidden crank he had exposed in the wall. How many are with you? He called. Silence. Then the answer came through the seam with a strange kind of exhaustion. 3 in this room. More below if they didn't move them. 3 in this room. The phrase dragged at his mind while he grabbed the crank and tested it again. Locked, but with play in it now. Something inside the mechanism had already yielded. Ghost sneezed once and jerked his head away from the bottom edge of the door. Mason smelled it right after. Antiseptic. Bleach. Stale ventilation. And underneath that, the copper edge of old blood. He turned the crank. Metal groaned in the wall. The wheel lock shuddered once and rotated a fraction. Dust drifted from the upper hinge. The woman behind the door made a sound that might have been a sob trying not to become hope. Then gunfire ripped through the cave mouth. Stone exploded beside Mason's shoulder. He dropped flat by instinct and fired once toward the flash outside. A curse answered him. Ghost lunged forward, then checked himself just inside the entrance when Mason snapped. "Hold!" The dog stayed. Barely. Mason rolled back toward the crank, jammed the flashlight between his shoulder and jaw, and hauled harder. The mechanism fought him, then gave another inch. The seam widened from a crack to the width of 2 fingers. Cold processed air burst into the cave. The beam slipped through the gap and struck white tile, a floor drain, the legs of an overturned restraint chair bolted to a track, and farther back a red emergency light bleeding across a second doorway. Ghost barked at the entrance again. Another round punched sparks from the outer rock. Mason returned fire without even looking, forcing the shooter back a step. Then a calm male voice came from the rain outside. "Lieutenant Reed, let go of the crank." That was wrong. He turned the crank harder. The voice outside did not rise. "Open that chamber, and you condemn everyone inside it." The woman behind the steel made a broken, furious sound. "He's lying! Open it!" Another voice answered her from deeper in the room. Male. Rough. Command hardened even through damage. "Stop shouting!" Mason froze for one heartbeat. There was another prisoner in there. Ghost slammed one paw against the cave floor, torn between the threat outside and the voices behind the steel. Mason made the choice for both of them. He shot upward at the dark bubble he had spotted near the cave roof above the frame. Glass burst. Hidden camera. Sparks spat down the wall. The calm voice vanished for half a second. Then a speaker crackled to life from somewhere inside the chamber itself. "There is always another lens, Lieutenant." Mason's jaw tightened. Watch from inside and outside. Whoever controlled this site had nested the trap long before he found it. "Who are you?" he called. Nobody answered from the entrance. The woman behind the door whispered one name anyway. "Vale." The second prisoner moved fast behind her and finally came into the light. He knew that face. Chief Petty Officer Aaron Velez. Declared dead during an extraction, so classified no one would even tell the families where the bodies had not been found. Aaron's beard had grown and rough and uneven. One side of his face was yellowed with old bruising. A short restraint chain still hung from one wrist. But the eyes were the same. Sharp. Controlled. Furious at hope for existing. "Mason?" he said. Mason stared through the gap. "You're supposed to be dead." Aaron gave a hollow breath. "That's the convenience of this place." The woman shoved weakly at his arm. "Don't do this now. I'm trying not to get us all killed." Outside, boots shifted over wet rock. At least 2 shooters. Maybe 3. None of them rushing the cave anymore. That meant the door mattered more than Mason did. Mason forced his voice steady. "How do I open it fully?" Aaron did not answer immediately. He scanned the cave, the entrance, the dog, the camera Mason had already destroyed, and whatever he saw in that 1 second made his expression darken. "They flagged you before you reached the door," he said. "What?" Aaron jerked his chin toward the chamber interior. "Status board. If you open this all the way, you need to move before they cycle the hall." The woman rounded on him, almost feral with desperation. "If he doesn't open it, we die in here." Aaron shot back. "If he opens it blind, everyone dies faster." Mason dropped the beam to the lower corner of the frame and found the recessed deadbolt Aaron had mentioned. Floor track. Left side. Buried under grime. He jammed the pry bar down. Aaron shouted, "Wait!" Too late. The metal struck home. A high electronic chime rang inside the chamber. Aaron closed his eyes once, like a man who had just heard a sentence pronounced. Mason felt the mountain answer from beneath them. Deep below the chamber, something vast began to unlock. Not one click. A sequence. Heavy. Hydraulic. Then came the screams. Distant at first. Then another. Then several more, different voices from different depths, rising through vents and pipe runs from lower in the facility. The woman stumbled backward from the gap with both hands over her mouth. "No," she whispered. "No, they wouldn't do it yet." Aaron opened his eyes and looked straight at Mason. "You triggered the lower archive." "What is the lower archive?" Aaron didn't blink. "The part they move when recovery fails." Ghost's bark changed again. Warning. Mason snapped the light toward the cave mouth. Through rain and cave mist, a man now stood in plain view just beyond the weather line. Older than the shooters. Dark coat. Empty hands. Still as stone. Too calm for gunfire. Director Vale. He did not hide. He watched the half-open chamber door with the composure of a man observing an experiment reach the interesting phase. Another scream ripped upward from below. Then metal doors began slamming somewhere deep under the chamber, one after another, as if the mountain itself were shutting cells or opening them. Mason shoved the steel wider by another inch and let the flashlight reach deeper into the room. Beneath the Trident insignia on the far wall, a digital status board still glowed on backup power. Most of the lines were numbers and subject strings Mason could not process fast enough. One line was words. Subject read, Mason legacy flag active. His blood ran cold. Then the line beneath it flickered, updated in real time, and settled into a second message. Link survivor pair confirmed. Read/Canine unit. This place had not just noticed him. It had been waiting for him too. The final line on the status board seemed to stare back at him. This place had not just noticed him. It had been waiting for him too. For one suspended second, Mason forgot the rain outside and the gunman near the cave mouth. The digital board on the far wall glowed through the widening crack with cold certainty, as if men, dogs, and ruined lives were nothing but inventory. Behind the door, Aaron Velez looked at Mason with the hollow recognition of a man who had learned hope was usually the first stage of punishment. Then the mountain answered again. Another deep mechanical lock turned far below the chamber. And the screams coming up through the vents stopped all at once. That silence was worse. Mason shoved the steel another inch wider and dropped the beam lower. White top gave way to the red-lit threshold of the inner hall. Small windows ran down the corridor beyond, each set into heavy steel doors. Some were dark. Some flashed emergency red. One had a hand pressed flat against the glass from the inside. A hand, then it vanished. Ghost barked at the cave mouth. Mason swung the light back toward daylight and caught movement. Two operators sliding across wet rock to opposite sides of the entrance, trying to build crossfire without exposing themselves fully. Black rain gear. Carbines. Professional spacing. Director Vale remained in the rain line behind them, still unarmed, still watching. Aaron saw Mason's glance and understood the angle instantly. "You can't hold the cave and clear the chamber." The woman near the door shook her head violently. "Then stop thinking and open it." "What's your name?" Mason asked. She stared as if the question itself hurt. "Tessa." Aaron shifted his chained wrist and grimaced. "There's another lock point under the right hinge. Mechanical release. But if you open past 30 degrees, the inner hall gets line of sight to the entrance." Mason looked back through the gap. "From who?" Aaron's mouth tightened. "From whatever Vale left armed when recovery fails." Outside, Vale spoke again, calm enough to sound almost polite. "Chief Velez, step away from the threshold. You know what happens if the breach widens without corridor control." Tessa's fear sharpened into hatred. "You said you were moving us." Vale did not deny it. I was. Then Lieutenant Reed arrived and accelerated the timeline. Mason felt something cold move through him at the wording. Not rescued because he arrived. Accelerated. As if the catastrophe was already scheduled, and he had merely forced it to begin early. Aaron saw the realization hit. You opened the wrong layer first. Mason kept his pistol aimed at the entrance. Explain. Aaron looked at the status board, then at the red inner hall. This chamber is intake quarantine. The lower archive is transport staging. If lower transport wakes before upper hall is sealed, every subject below starts moving at once. Ghost suddenly whipped back toward the interior and barked at the red hall. Something in one of the door windows moved again. Not a hand this time. A face. Thin. Hollow-cheeked. Eyes too wide in the red flash. It disappeared so fast Mason might have doubted it if Ghost hadn't lunged at the same moment. Then the lights in the corridor changed. The red strobes cut out. A flat white emergency strip came on at ankle height, running the length of the hall like a line being drawn. Aaron's expression changed immediately. Down! Mason dropped by instinct, dragging Tessa with his free hand and shouting, Ghost! The dog flattened just as automatic fire erupted from the hall. Not from a man in sight. From turret ports recessed low in the corridor walls. Rounds tore through the chamber in a brutal lateral sweep, shredding the overturned restraint chair, punching chips from tile, and blasting the gap around the half-open door. Mason pressed Tessa against the floor and returned fire through the widening seam toward the nearest muzzle flash. Aaron kicked a steel tray off a lower cart and used it like a shield, dragging himself behind it while rounds chewed sparks from the edge. The sweep stopped after 4 seconds. Ghost was up before the echo died, barking toward the red hall with foam at his lips. One bullet had clipped the cave wall above him and stung his ear, leaving a bright line of blood in his fur. Mason saw it and felt the kind of anger that clears thought instead of clouding it. Tessa was crying quietly without knowing it. Aaron shoved the steel tray aside. Now you know why the door stays mostly shut. Outside, one of the operators used the burst as cover and rushed the cave mouth. Ghost saw him first and met him in mid-step. The shepherd hit the man at knee height and drove him sideways into the rock wall. The rifle discharged into the ceiling. Stone dust rained through the entrance. Mason fired once, and the operator vanished out into the rain with a scream and Ghost still attached to him. Mason surged toward the right hinge with the pry bar. How do I kill the turret sweep? Aaron lunged too, grabbing the wheel lock with his good hand. You don't. You beat the timing. Together they forced the door wider another 4 inches. More white air flooded the cave. More of the chamber opened up. A med cart overturned near the far wall, dried blood dragged toward the inner corridor. 3 steel cots bolted down, 1 empty restraint collar hanging from a chain in the corner. Tessa saw Mason looking. Don't ask. A second chime rang from the hall. Aaron's head snapped toward it. Again! Down! They hit the floor as the automatic sweep resumed. This time rounds punched lower, aiming for anyone who had learned the first pattern. Mason felt one pass so close to his shoulder that the heat of it seemed to sear the air itself. Ghost barked outside in a burst of rage and pain. Then the gunfire drowned everything. When it ended, something else started. A heavy door farther down the corridor opened with a magnetic thunk. Then another. Then running footsteps. Not tactical. Not measured. Bare feet. Many of them. Tessa went white. No! Mason rose enough to get the flashlight beam into the corridor. The ankle lights illuminated motion in fragments, gaunt figures spilling from open cells, some in gray institutional shirts, some in stained thermal layers, all moving with the panic speed of people who did not care what the bullets did if the doors behind them stayed open. The others kept coming anyway. Aaron swore under his breath. They opened the subject blocks. Vale's voice came through the cave entrance again, louder now over the chaos. Lieutenant Reed, if you want any of them alive, step away from the chamber and surrender the dog. Vale finally let something human into his voice, though it was not compassion. It was irritation. The canine pair marker is complicating prioritization. Release the animal and I'll slow the haul. Ghost came back through the gun smoke at that exact moment, blood on his shoulder, and someone else's blood darker on his jaws. He planted himself between Mason and the cave entrance, chest heaving, still ready. Mason's answer was immediate. No. Bill gave a minute nod. Then we proceed with full recovery. A klaxon began sounding deeper in the facility. The status board on the far wall flickered. Most of the red subject lines vanished at once. In their place, 3 larger lines appeared in pulsing white text. Surface breach confirmed. Recovery teams in motion. Descent shaft unsealing. Aaron saw it and actually went still. Mason noticed. What? Aaron looked at the board like a man reading a verdict. The shaft? Tessa backed away from the hull, shaking her head. No. No, he wouldn't do that with subjects still moving. Vale answered her from the entrance. I would do that because subjects are moving. The mountain trembled. Not from thunder. From below. A low grinding shudder rolled up through the cave floor, the chamber tile, and the hidden conduits in the wall. Dust sifted from the roof. The white ankle lights in the corridor flickered once. Then the floor drain in the chamber belched cold air upward like the facility had just inhaled. Ghost backed 1 step from the drain and barked at it. Mason angled the flashlight down. A thin curl of white vapor was rising through the grate. Aaron's face emptied. They're venting the lower shaft, Tessa whispered. What's in the lower shaft? Aaron did not answer fast enough. The sound was not human panic anymore. It was machinery making room for something worse to rise where the dead air had slept. Because the drain cover moved. Only half an inch. But enough for Mason to see metal bolts beneath it retracting from the inside. And from whatever was rising up through the chamber floor, a man's voice floated out with terrifying clarity. Lieutenant Reed, it said. If you are hearing this, it means my son failed to keep you away from the cave. The voice from beneath the drain did not sound pre-recorded. It sounded patient. Lieutenant Reed, it said again through the widening grate, calm enough to chill the blood. If you are hearing this, it means my son failed to keep you away from the cave. The white vapor rose thicker between the steel slats. Ghost backed 1 step, then braced, barking straight at the floor as if whatever lived under the chamber mattered more than the gunman outside or the turret fire in the hall. Mason kept the flashlight locked on the drain cover, while every instinct in him screamed to change angles. My son? Director Vale outside the cave mouth had a father. And that father was somewhere below the chamber, speaking up through the floor like the mountain itself had learned his name. Aaron's face hardened with a recognition that looked older than pain. Don't answer. Mason didn't. He shifted the pry bar in his hand and moved 3 steps left, putting the drain, the half-open door, and the cave entrance into one brutal triangle of attention. Tessa crouched near the far cot, shaking uncontrollably now. The red-lit hall beyond the chamber had become a blur of movement. Bare feet slapped tile. People cried out. One body hit the floor and kept crawling. The ankle-level emergency lights turned every face into something haunted. Outside, Vale called into the cave. You are out of time, Mason. Ghost barked toward the entrance, then snapped back toward the drain. The grate rose another half-inch. Not forced from below by hands. Lifted mechanically. Bolts withdrew in sequence, with metallic clacks Mason felt in his knees. Cold air rushed out carrying smells that did not belong in any cave system. Machine grease, sterilizer, old paper, burned circuitry, and beneath it all the stale grief of closed spaces opened too late. The voice under the floor continued. You were always going to come here. It was only a question of whether you arrived as a subject, a retrieval asset, or a man curious enough to mistake instinct for choice. Mason's jaw tightened. Who are you? For a moment only the hiss of vapor answered. Then, Dr. Elias Vale. Aaron closed his eyes once. Tessa whispered, No. The name struck Mason strangely. Not with recognition, but with the shape of one. He had heard it somewhere before. A briefing? A redacted file? Something buried under years of trying not to remember the mission that had shattered his life. Ghost growled low and looked up at Mason, as if waiting for permission to attack the floor itself. The cave mouth flashed white. A round punch through the outer rock and ricocheted off the door frame. Stone dust showered the chamber. Vale's surface operators were still holding angles, still preventing escape without rushing the kill box. They knew exactly what the turrets, the hull, and the rising shaft would do for them if they just kept pressure on the entrance. Mason fired once toward the muzzle flash and forced the nearest shooter back. Aaron was already moving. Chained wrist or not, he crossed to a low cabinet by the med cart and ripped its door off with a grunt. Inside were sealed utility tools, trauma shears, a shock batten with a cracked handle, and one heavy magnetic key locked in a bracket. He yanked at the key. It didn't move. Bolted, he snapped. Tessa lurched toward him. What is it? Inner shaft override. Mason looked from the key to the drain. You can stop it? Aaron's answer took too long. No, he said finally. But maybe I can slow the platform if the brake assembly still answers local input. Something slammed the hull again beyond the chamber. Not turret fire this time. A body. Then another. Subjects were piling at the inner threshold, desperate enough to throw themselves against the geometry of the trap. Mason caught a glimpse of one young man in a gray shirt with both palms raised, as if surrender might still mean anything here. The next muzzle sweep from the corridor ports drove him backward out of sight in a red burst of tile and screaming. Tessa folded over herself and gagged. The chamber shook again. This time the drain cover rose clear of the floor and slid sideways on hidden tracks. Vapor flooded the room in a white belly close to the tile. Beneath the opening was not a pipe shaft or duct. It was an elevator well. A steel cage platform was rising through it, guided by hydraulic arms and old military rails. Low white lights burned around its perimeter. Cable bundles climbed into darkness below. Bolted to the front of the lift cage was a camera assembly aimed directly at Mason. Watching him. Cataloging him. The platform stopped level with the chamber floor. And on it stood no armed team, no automated turret, no faceless technicians in masks. It held a single chair. Strapped to the chair was a man. He was thin enough to look partly folded into himself, head hanging forward, arms bound at the wrists to steel rests, one side of his face hidden by blood-matted hair. A black hard monitor cable ran from his chest to a portable unit clipped to the back of the chair. For lines snaked under the restraints. He might have been dead if not for the slow, visible rise and fall of his ribs. Tessa made a sound like someone being cut open from the inside. Aaron went still. Not cautious stillness. Shock. Mason stepped closer before he could stop himself. The man's jawline, even under starvation and bruising, stirred a shape of memory Mason could not place. Something old. Something from before the mission, before the cabin, before he decided the world had taken enough from him to stop asking for more. The intercom hidden in the lift chair crackled. Elias Vale's voice came from it now, warm with satisfaction. I had hoped the visual element would help. The man in the chair lifted his head. Mason's breath stopped. Not because the face was familiar. Because it was his own face, older by 25 years. Same eyes. Same mouth. Same scar along the chin he had inherited from nobody he remembered. Only time and damage had made this version of him thinner, grayer, and cruelly exhausted. Tessa stumbled backward into the wall. Aaron whispered, "Jesus!" The man in the chair looked straight at Mason through half-open eyes and tried to smile. The motion failed halfway through. When he finally spoke, his voice came out shredded by disuse and chemicals. "Mason!" The chamber tilted. There should have been no world in which that face existed. Mason had grown up with one photograph of his father, taken before he was born, and even that picture had been burned in the house fire when he was 9. The only permanent thing left from him had been absence, military rumor, a folded flag from a unit that would never answer questions, and a mother who learned to stop explaining because explanations changed every year. Ghost's growl vanished. The dog stared at the man in the chair, ears suddenly forward, head tilted with stunned alertness. Then, impossibly, Ghost whined. Not threat. Recognition. Mason heard himself say the word before he believed it. "Dad?" The man in the chair shut his eyes. One tear tracked through the grime on his face. Outside, Director Vale's son laughed softly in the rain. "There he is!" Mason swung toward the cave mouth with murder in his chest, but the older voice from the chair cut through him first. "Don't!" the man rasped. "That's what he wants." Mason looked back. The man in the chair swallowed hard, fighting for enough breath to stay conscious. "Name's not Reed," he whispered. "Not originally." Aaron stared between them in disbelief. "You know him?" The man managed the smallest nod. "I knew him as an infant. Then they corrected the paperwork." Mason's entire body had gone cold and hot at the same time. The world around him kept moving, the hall alarms, the gunfire, the white vapor, the subjects running in the corridor, but inside his skin something had stopped making sense. He took one step toward the lift. Ghost moved with him. The man in the chair saw the dog, and something broke across his ruined expression. "He kept the line," he whispered, looking at Ghost as if the animal were proof that some promise had survived longer than men. Mason's voice came out low and dangerous. "Who are you?" The answer seemed to cost the man more than blood. "My name is Nathan Vale." The surname hit like a detonation. Tessa covered her mouth. Aaron actually recoiled. Even the chamber's cold air felt sharper around the word. Vale. Not Reed. Vale. The man strapped into the chair, this broken, starving, impossible reflection of Mason's own face, looked at him through tears and fluorescent light and gave him the emotional shock the mountain had saved for last. "I'm your father," he said. And before Mason could decide whether to believe him, one green line jumped sharply across the monitor screen once. Then the hard monitor on the chair gave one long, flat tone. The flat tone from the hard monitor cut through the chamber harder than gunfire. For one suspended second, everything else seemed to step back from it. The hall alarms. The screams in the corridor. The rain at the cave mouth. Ghosts breathing. Vale's men holding angles outside. All of it shrank behind that single merciless sound. Nathan Vale, if that was really his name, if that ruined face really belonged to the man Mason had grown up missing, sat strapped to the rising chair with his head hanging forward and a dead line burning green across the monitor. Mason moved before thought could stop him. He reached the platform in 2 strides, holstered the pistol, and slammed his fingers against the monitor leads. One had torn loose from Nathan's chest during the lift. Another was barely attached through dried blood and medical tape. Flatline, yes. But not certain. Not yet. "Help me!" Mason snapped. Aaron was already there. Shock burned through the man's own disbelief fast enough to turn him useful. He ripped the portable unit off the chair back, checked the cable seating, then went for Nathan's throat with 2 fingers. "Pulse!" he said. Weak. Thread thin. Tessa staggered closer, still staring at Nathan's face and Mason's, as if the similarity had broken her sense of the room. That's not possible. The speaker hidden in the lift frame crackled with Elias Vale's amusement. On the contrary, he said, it is the most predictable thing in this mountain. Ghost leapt onto the platform and pressed against Nathan's knee, whining low and urgent. Mason tore the chest straps open. Talk to me, he barked at Nathan. You don't get to show up now and die. Nathan's lashes twitched but did not rise. Outside the cave, Elias's son called into the chamber. You should listen to the old man while he still has a usable voice. Mason almost reached for the pistol again, but Aaron caught his wrist. No, Aaron said. That's what they want. Keep your eyes in the room. The corridor beyond the chamber had gone from chaos to pattern. Mason saw it now under the ankle lights and the blood. The subject doors deeper in the hall were opening in timed pairs. Some people bolted free. Others stayed huddled inside, too conditioned or too broken to trust an open door. The corridor turrets were herding movement away from the chamber threshold and toward the deeper hall, toward the lower archive. Elias wanted the subjects moving, but not toward the cave. Mason looked up at the status board again. The white text had changed. Subject strings were disappearing line by line, replaced by directional tags and retrieval codes. Relocate, reclassify, transfer, priority, bloodline, retain. That tightened something in his gut. Tessa saw where he was looking. That line means they don't move you like the others. Who qualifies? Mason asked. She shook her head too fast. I never saw the whole system. Aaron answered instead. Family branches. Survivors with inherited markers. Children attached to operators they wanted to model. Anyone tied to what they called continuity. Mason looked at Nathan. And me? Aaron didn't want to answer, which was answer enough. You were flagged before tonight. Ghost raised his head sharply. Not at the status board. Not at the cave mouth. At Nathan. The old man's fingers had moved. Barely. Just enough to scrape the steel armrest. Mason dropped instantly. Nathan. The man's eyes opened as slits. Pain lived there. Sedation too. But beneath both was a desperate clarity. You have to close the cave, Nathan whispered. Mason stared at him, chest heaving. No, listen. Nathan's voice shredded on the second word. Site K was never designed to keep people in. It was built to breed outcomes. Aaron went still. Tessa backed up one step. Even Ghost stopped whining. Nathan tried to swallow. Behavioral archive, he said. That's the clean label. But below the files and the cells and the transfer floors, it was lineage work. Pattern inheritance. Loyalty stress. Trauma bonding. Dog handler pair retention. They studied what survived operations, then tried to reproduce it. Mason felt cold rage climb his spine. You're saying this place made people. Nathan's mouth twitched. It measured them first. Then it started making choices. Outside, Elias Vale's son laughed softly through the rain. Now he wants morality from the architecture. Mason ignored him. Why am I flagged? Nathan closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them again, he looked not at Mason but at Ghost. Because you were never incidental. The dog's ears lifted. Mason's face hardened. Start from the beginning. There wasn't a beginning, Nathan whispered. Just a handoff. A fire. New papers. A woman told to disappear with a child before my father reached the safe house. My father! Not Elias. Someone above him. Older. Worse. Tessa pressed both hands to her temples. No. No, Psyche didn't go back that far. Nathan's laugh was almost soundless. Psyche is only the version you were shown. The hall lights flickered again. A door somewhere deeper below the chamber slammed open with a magnetic boom. Aaron looked toward the red corridor. Lower transports awake. Mason kept his hand on Nathan's shoulder, feeling the fragile rise and fall of him. Who put me with the reeds? Nathan tried to answer, but a violent cough bent him sideways. Blood spotted his lip. Ghost licked once at the old man's wrist and then lifted his head, listening to something Mason could not yet hear. Nathan finally got the words out. Your mother. For 6 months. He dragged air into battered lungs. Then they found her. She got you out through a training kennel route because they weren't tracking the animal transfers hard enough yet. Mason stared, not understanding at first. Then the second half landed. Training kennel route. His gaze shifted to Ghost. The shepherd was locked on Nathan now with an expression Mason had seen only a few times before, when the dog recognized commands no one else should have known. Nathan saw it in Mason's eyes. They kept the working lines tied to the same family program. Dogs, handlers, offspring, grief response, recovery drive. You and that dog were never supposed to meet by accident. The words made the cave feel poisoned. Mason stepped back. Not from Nathan. From the idea. No accident. No rescue. No chance. Ghost, the one loyal thing he had believed was his because they had survived the same hell together, now sat in the center of a sentence that suggested even that bond had been mapped before he ever touched a leash. Outside, Elias's son called through the entrance. Lieutenant Reed, or Vale, or whatever version comforts you, if you would like the old man to finish, step away from the chamber door and surrender the canine. Aaron's expression became murder. He needs the dog alive. Nathan nodded. Always did. Mason looked from the cave mouth back to the status board. New lines were appearing in rapid white text. Pair retention active Gen 2 observation window open patriarchal node restored patriarchal node. What does that mean? He asked. Nathan's eyes found the board, and for the first time real fear eclipsed pain. It means the archive recognized me. He tried to sit forward against the chair restraints Aaron had loosened. Mason, if the patriarchal node wakes fully, the lower vault opens. Aaron swore under his breath. Tessa looked between them. What's in the lower vault? Nathan's gaze held on Mason for a terrible beat before he answered. The other branches. Silence hit harder than noise. Mason heard the words, but his mind refused their shape. Branches meant families. Children. Men and women. Subjects organized like bloodlines in storage. A living catalog built around inheritance. Ghost barked once, sharp warning. Mason heard it too. Footsteps. Not outside the cave. Not in the hall. From below the platform. The lift cage had not come up alone. Something was climbing the service ladder bolted inside the shaft wall beneath the chair. Aaron spun with a shock baton in hand. Tessa backed toward the med cart. Mason drew the pistol again and angled the flashlight down past the platform rails. White vapor coiled up the shaft. A black glove appeared through it, gripping the rung below floor level. Then another hand. Then the top of a helmet. Not one of the outer operators in rain gear. This was different. Full respirator. Visor. Dark harness rig. No visible insignia except a white slash painted across the mask. Aaron went pale. Archive divers. Nathan's voice broke. No. They're early. The first diver's helmet rose level with the platform floor. A second shape was climbing right behind him. And just before the lead figure pulled fully into view, Ghost stopped barking and did something Mason had never seen him do before. He backed away from the shaft and tucked his ears in fear. Ghost backed away from the shaft with his ears pinned so tight they nearly vanished into his skull. Mason had seen the dog bleed, charge rifle fire, drag himself through smoke, and come back anyway. He had never seen Ghost afraid. The first archive diver pulled level with the platform floor. White slash across the visor. Respirator hissing. Dark harness rig slick with condensation. No insignia. Aaron's voice came out barely above a whisper. If they're using divers, the lower vault already has water. Nathan tried to sit forward in the chair. The motion tore a sound from him that was part pain, part urgency. Mason! Off the platform! Now! The lead diver rose onto the grated floor with a compact weapon mounted under one forearm and a shock baton magnetized across his chest rig. He turned his helmet slowly until the black visor faced Mason and Ghost together. Then he spoke through the mask. K9 first! Ghost snarled, but the fear stayed under it. Mason fired. The round hit center visor and threw the diver's head sideways. The mask cracked but did not break. Aaron lunged at the same instant with a damaged baton and drove it into the second diver's neck seam as he came over the edge. Blue current snapped through wet gear. The man convulsed and fell backward into the shaft, slamming the ladder on the way down. Tessa screamed, not from fear but effort. She had seized the med cart and shoved it across the chamber floor. It smashed into the lead diver's knees just as he recovered from the shot. Mason hit him high with his shoulder, trying to drive him back into the lift rails. The diver didn't go down. He dropped the baton from his chest rig into one hand and struck Mason across the ribs with enough force to blast the air from him. Ghost launched on pure reflex and buried his teeth in the man's forearm. The diver pivoted, hooked Ghost's harness, and slammed him against the platform rail. Ghost! Mason came off the floor in a blind rush and put 3 rounds into the diver's torso at contact range. Armor caught 2. The third found the gap under the arm where Ghost had torn the sleeve open. The diver staggered, dropped the dog, and Aaron finished him with the baton under the jawline. He went rigid, then limp. The body hit the platform. Move! Aaron shouted. Mason dropped to one knee beside Ghost. The shepherd staggered up instantly, shaken but not broken, eyes locked on the shaft with a refusal Mason had never seen before. Below them, more metal clanged. Nathan was fighting the straps with furious, wasted energy. Leave the chair. Mason cut the last restraint anyway. Not happening. Nathan grabbed his wrist with surprising force. Listen to me for once. Outside the cave mouth, Elias's son called in through the rain. Father, they've engaged the lower team. The answer came not from the chamber speaker this time, but from a live microphone inside the platform rail. Then collapse the cave when the sun is contained. Mason felt the sentence like a nail through the floor. Collapse the cave. Aaron heard it too. We're out of minutes. Tessa was already at the wall cabinet again, pulling free the magnetic shaft key with both hands and using one of the broken straps as leverage. I've got it. Gunfire burst through the cave mouth and shattered the cabinet door above her head. She dropped hard. Glass and metal rained over the tile. Ghost spun toward the entrance, barking through pain, then back toward the shaft, forced again to choose between disasters. Mason hauled Nathan out of the chair. The old man nearly collapsed at once. He was all angles and tremor, but under Mason's grip was the same height, shoulder line, and scar under the chin. Aaron stripped the dead diver's forearm weapon and checked its controls in one fast glance. Compressed dart projector, he said. Short range. Useful? Aaron looked at the shaft. 4-1. A new helmet rose through the vapor. Mason shoved Nathan behind the overturned cots and fired at the ladder again. The next diver ducked under the shot and came up moving faster than the first. Aaron met him with the captured dart unit, fired once, and buried a steel needle through the throat gasket. The diver clawed at the dart, lost his footing, and vanished backward with a hollow crash below. The chamber floor trembled twice. Not from the divers. From cave itself. Outside, charges were being set. Ghost barked at the entrance with a sound Mason knew. Countdown. Tessa had the magnetic key free now. "Nathan!" she shouted. "Where?" Nathan braced himself on the cot, eyes squeezed against pain and memory. "Inner hall. Right side. Third panel after the first turret recess. Manual descent lock." Aaron was already moving. Mason grabbed Nathan under one arm and dragged him toward the door, while Tessa covered the cave mouth with Mason's pistol. Ghost limped beside them, never once leaving Mason's knee for more than a step. The half-open steel door scraped wider as they forced through into the white chamber. The corridor guns had stopped sweeping. The hall had changed modes. White floor strips pulsed in one direction, deeper into the facility. Subject doors stood open. Some held staring faces, some were empty, some held bodies. Water glimmered under the distant lights at the lower bend. Aaron reached the third wall panel, jammed the magnetic key in, and ripped it down. Nothing. He slammed it with the baton. Still nothing. Nathan fought to straighten. "Manual wheel behind it." Red spindle. Tessa arrived and tore her fingers bloody on the jammed metal until Aaron bent the panel far enough to expose the recessed wheel. He grabbed it and turned. The floor shuddered, then stopped. Below them, the climbing noises paused. They bought a second. Then the chamber speaker crackled to life again with Elias Vale's voice, no longer warm, no longer patient. "You should have stayed in absence, Nathan." Nathan looked toward the speaker hidden in the hall ceiling, and the exhaustion dropped from his face. "You built all this to prove you could outlive blood," he said hoarsely. "And you still had to chain your own family to do it." Then Elias answered softly, "I chained the variables that refused to become data." Tessa stared at Nathan. "Who else is in the vault?" Nathan's gaze moved down the corridor to the water and open doors. "Not files. Families. Fractured lines. Children taken after operators went missing. Survivors reclassified as behavioral assets. Anyone who fit the continuity model and couldn't be left in open records." Mason's throat tightened. "How many?" Nathan shut his eyes once. "Enough to build new branches." The words were still landing when the first charge at the cave mouth detonated. The blast came through stone and steel. Dust punched down the corridor. Ceiling lights blew out in a chain. Ghost yelped and ducked under Mason's hand. Tessa hit the wall. Aaron went to one knee, but kept hold of the red spindle. "Second charge coming," he shouted. Mason looked back through the chamber doorway. The cave entrance was gone behind falling rock and smoke. Daylight narrowed to a jagged slit. They had lost the surface. Ghost pushed hard against Mason's leg, breathing fast, stopping the run Mason wanted to make. Nathan saw it too. "No," he said. "Forward." Mason looked at him with murder in his face. "There are people outside. There are people under us," Nathan shot back. "And if Elias seals the cave completely, this becomes the only way left." The second charge blew. The chamber behind them vanished in a roar of collapsing rock and white dust. The steel door buckled inward on one hinge. One turret in the hall sparked and died. The white floor strips flickered. And somewhere below the waterline, deep in the lower archive, alarms changed pitch. Not purge. Transfer. Aaron heard it immediately. "They're moving the vault." Nathan's face drained. "Then we already failed." Mason stared at him. "What do you mean already?" Nathan looked straight at him through the settling dust. "The lower branches aren't stored under this cave anymore," he said. "They were loaded for transport before you ever got here." The floor shook again, harder. Not collapse. Motion. Tessa whispered. "No." Aaron didn't whisper at all. "Train." Mason turned toward the water-lit bend at the end of the hall. Through the open subject doors and the flickering corridor, a deep industrial rumble moved away from them through hidden tunnels in the mountain. The archive was leaving, and with it, whatever family lines and children still existed beyond this floor. Ghost barked once into the shaking light. Then, from one of the open rooms to Mason's left, a small voice spoke through dust and alarm with heartbreaking clarity. "Dad?" Mason turned. A little boy stood in the doorway of cell 14, barefoot in a gray institutional shirt, staring not at Nathan, but straight at Aaron Velez. The little boy standing in cell 14 could not have been older than 6. Barefoot, gray institutional shirt, thin wrists, a bruise fading yellow near one eye. He stood in the doorway like the room had pushed him out instead of him choosing to step into the hall. Behind him, the cell held a narrow cot, a drain in the center of the floor, and one child's drawing taped crookedly above the bed. But none of that hit Aaron first. The word did. "Dad?" It came out of the boy like something fragile enough to break if anyone else heard it. Mason felt Aaron go still beside the panel wheel. Not tactical stillness. Recognition so direct it bypassed everything else. The alarms kept sounding. The hidden train below kept rumbling deeper into the mountain. Dust still drifted from the collapsed cave behind them. But for one impossible beat, the corridor belonged only to a child who believed a dead man had finally come back. Ghost's ears lifted. Nathan stared. Tessa made a broken sound behind her teeth. Aaron looked at the boy as if he had been shot in a place no medic could reach. "What did you say?" The boy swallowed. "They said you would come when the pattern was finished." Pattern? The word landed with the same cold precision as everything else in this place. Not family. Not rescue. Pattern? Mason looked from the child to Aaron. "You have a son?" Aaron answered without looking away from the boy. "I had a wife." Had. Past tense. Military. Morning built into grammar. The child took one careful step forward. "They showed me your picture." He paused, searching Aaron's ruined face for permission to keep believing. "You're Aaron." Aaron's breath left him hard. "Leo." He did not ask the name. He already knew it somehow. Leo nodded once, trying to be brave and failing in the smallest, most devastating ways. "Mom said if I remembered your name, I wouldn't disappear." Nathan shut his eyes. Tessa turned away for a second. Mason felt the old machine around them change shape again. Up until that second it had all still been horrific in the abstract. Now it had a child's face and a dead man's name attached to it. The floor under their boots shuddered again. Not collapse. Motion. The archive train below was accelerating. From deeper in the mountain came the iron scream of brakes taking curves too fast, as if the train were not simply moving but fleeing. The sound threaded through the corridor walls, through the open cells, through Leo's breathing, and turned every second after into something stolen. Nathan opened his eyes and looked toward the lower bend. "They're moving the branches." Mason snapped to him. "What branches?" Nathan looked at Leo, then at Aaron, then finally at Mason. "The family lines," he said. "All of them." Aaron finally moved. He crossed the space between himself and Leo in 3 quick steps, then dropped to one knee in front of the boy. "Leo," he said carefully, "where's your mother?" The boy's eyes slid toward the lower hall. "The lady took her down when the lights changed." "What lady?" "The one with your eyes." That made Aaron freeze again. Nathan whispered one name. "Mara." Tessa looked at him sharply. "The voice on the system?" Nathan nodded. "My daughter." Mason turned so hard his shoulder hit the cell frame. "Your daughter?" The old man met his stare. "Your sister." No one moved. The rumble of the departing archive seemed to deepen under the silence. "Sister." Mason almost laughed from the violence of the impossibility. I don't have a sister. Nathan swallowed blood and memory together. You do? She was taken after you were moved. Elias kept her. Raised her inside the lower program. Ghost barked once at the ceiling speaker, sharp and furious. Mason's head turned toward the dead camera in the cell, and then back to Nathan. You're telling me the voice running transfer downstairs belongs to my sister. I'm telling you, Nathan said, that Elias built his favorite branch out of the child your mother couldn't reach in time. The hallway tilted. For a second Mason was 10 again, standing outside the house fire while neighbors kept asking his mother whether she had gotten everyone out. Everyone had always felt like the wrong word. He had spent years thinking trauma had bent the memory. Now the distortion had a name. Leo tugged once on Aaron's sleeve. Are you really him? Aaron looked down at the boy, and whatever answer he had meant to give broke under the weight of everything else. He settled for truth stripped bare. Yeah, he said quietly. I'm him. Leo nodded as if confirming a private prayer. Then he did the cruelest thing a child can do to a damaged man. He reached up with both arms. Aaron made a sound Mason would remember longer than gunfire. He lifted the boy at once, almost roughly, because gentleness would have taken too long. Leo clung to him with the absolute trust of someone who had never been held by the right person before but knew it anyway. The floor shuddered harder. A new voice came through the corridor speakers. Female. Controlled. Containment note, she said. Cell 14 has achieved paternal confirmation. Log emotional transfer latency. Nathan went gray. Mason stared at the speaker grill over the corridor bend. Mara, Nathan whispered. The voice continued, clinical and smooth. Subject Leo remains responsive to image pair conditioning. Field confirmation of Aaron Velez produces stabilizing effect. Recommend continuation if retrieval remains possible. Aaron looked like he wanted to tear the walls apart. Mason stepped into the corridor and shouted at the speaker. You're talking about a child. The answer came back instantly. I'm talking about a branch, Mara said. The hallway went cold around this sentence. Ghost bared his teeth. Leo buried his face in Aaron's neck. Tessa whispered, My God. Nathan looked toward the speaker, with naked ruin in his face. Mara. Please. The pause before her reply was the most human sound she had made yet. Then, You don't get to use my name like you raised me. Nathan flinched like he had been struck. The heavy footsteps came then. Measured. Armored. Multiple. Recovery climbing from the lower maintenance route. Aaron shifted Leo higher against his shoulder and looked at Mason over the boy's head. Everything in his face had changed. Tell me the route, Aaron said. Nathan pointed toward the lower bend. Sedation corridor. Wet room. Then the maintenance drop. Tessa shook her head fast. If Mara controls transfer, she'll lock the drop. Nathan answered without taking his eyes off the speaker. Only if Elias gave her full patriarchal authority. Mason caught the phrase. Patriarchal. Nathan didn't want to say it. He had to. The system changes command when a direct bloodline node enters the archive. Understanding arrived in pieces. The status board flagging Mason. The sudden appearance of Nathan from the rising lift. The train moving as soon as the cave breach registered. Mason felt his pulse go cold. You mean me? Nathan held his gaze. You and me both. Mara answered from the speaker before Nathan could add more. Correction, she said. Not both. The ceiling lights flickered once. Then every white floor strip in the corridor changed at the same time from steady illumination to pulsing blue. The alarm shifted pitch. Somewhere deeper in the mountain, steel brakes screamed. Ghost lowered himself and growled toward the bend. On the dead status panel inside the chamber behind them, New text flashed alive in white. Primary patriarchal node recognized, secondary node invalidated, transfer priority updated. Nathan stared at the words, like he had just watched his own execution signed in real time. Mason felt dread climb his spine. Invalidated how? Nathan answered too late. Because Mara did. By blood certainty, she said. The phrase meant nothing for half a second. Then her next sentence hit. Lieutenant Reed is not Nathan Vale's son. No one breathed. Leo stopped crying. Aaron went rigid. Tessa actually swayed where she stood. Mason looked at Nathan and saw the truth before the old man spoke. Not surprise. Grief. The grief of someone who had loved a lie because the alternative was emptier than loneliness. Nathan's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. I raised you in my head, he whispered. I believed. Mason took one step back. Not from the approaching recovery team. From him. The whole corridor seemed to sharpen and blur at once. Same face. Same scar line. Same impossible recognition that had torn him open minutes ago. Now all of it felt like architecture again. Design. Manipulation. A system showing him the father he had wanted in order to keep him rooted exactly where it needed him. Then Mara delivered the reveal in a voice so calm it turned Mason's blood to ice. Elias Vale is your father, she said. And I have been moving our family without you long enough. The corridor lost its shape around Mara's voice. Elias Vale is your father, she said. And I have been moving our family without you long enough. For one suspended second, even the alarm seemed farther away. Mason stared at the speaker above the lower bend, as if the metal itself might split open and explain how a sentence that impossible had crossed the air so calmly. Elias Vale. The man at the cave mouth. The architect of the archive. The bloodline collector who turned children into branches and grief into data. His father. Ghost pressed hard against Mason's leg, sensing the fracture in him before anyone else could. The shepherd's growl never left the lower hall. Leo clung to Aaron's neck. Tessa stared from Nathan to the speaker and back again. Nathan looked not surprised, only destroyed by the fact that the truth had arrived exactly this late. Mara spoke again, controlled and clinical. Primary patriarchal node now active. Secondary node invalidated. Recovery should proceed before attachment noise compromises the corridor. Leo whispered, Is she talking about me? Aaron answered without looking at him. No. It was a lie. Everyone heard it. The armored footsteps from below came closer. 3 sets. Heavy. Deliberate. Recovery climbing from the maintenance branch. Nathan swallowed once and pointed toward the lower bend. The wet room. That's the only path to the transport drop if the train hasn't cleared the next gate. The train already moved, Mason said. Then that's where your sister is. The word cut harder than the first revelation. Sister. Not abstract blood now. A real woman running transfer with Mason's lost history in her throat. Ghost barked once at the speaker as if he understood the shape of betrayal in the air. Mason looked at Nathan. Tell me everything later. If there is a later, Nathan said. The corridor wall beside cell 14 split open. A white-lit chamber unfolded from hidden seams in the concrete. Curved glass, recessed sample arms, biometric panel glowing green. Medical clean. Ritual cold. Nathan saw it and went pale. No. Aaron looked from the chamber to Mason. What is it? Lineage confirmation, Nathan said. The wet room won't open without a direct blood scan. Mara's voice sharpened. Brother, step inside. Mason didn't move. The recovery team hit the lower bend at the same moment. Black shields. Sealed helmets. Compact rifles. No hurry. They knew the corridor belonged to geometry now. Aaron pushed Leo toward Tessa. Take him. Leo clung harder. No. Ghost barked, torn between the boy and Mason. Mara spoke again, softer now, intimate in a way that felt invasive. I have your childhood records, your kennel transfer file, your field psych history, and the incident photos from your mother's safe house. Don't make me beg for the one thing I came here to see in person. Mason's face hardened. You don't know me. No, she said. I got the version she stole. The lead shield advanced another step. Aaron fired the captured dart launcher first. The needle struck the exposed wrist seam of the second man. He jerked, hit the wall, and blocked the stack for a heartbeat. Move! Aaron shouted. Mason ran for the white chamber. Not because he trusted it. Because the children on that train were already moving away. Ghost stayed welded to his knee. The glass rose around Mason the instant he stepped onto the plate. Blue skin light ran up from boots to skull. 2 microneedles snapped out and bit into his palm and neck before he could jerk clear. Pain. Then heat. Then the sterile chime of acceptance, logic waking. Outside the glass, Aaron met the lead shield with a shock baton and a stolen shield rim. Tessa dragged Leo behind the half-shut cell door. Nathan slammed one palm against the glass with all the fury left in him. Mason, don't complete it. The panel flashed. Genetic root check patriarchal authority query succession conflict detected. Mara's breathing came over the speaker now, not quite calm anymore. Come on! The lead recovery operator drove Aaron backward into the wall. Ghost launched at the glass, teeth bared, leaving blood where his paws struck it. The panel changed. Primary node verified. Vale Mason E. The entire level lurched. Speakers came alive all at once. Interim command transfer available, the archive said. Nathan went white. No! Mason stared at the words. Available. Not complete. The machine was offering him the keys to a thing he still did not fully understand. Mara was faster. Open wet room. Open pursuit access. Open transport bridge. Nothing happened. The panel flashed again. Voice command required outside. Aaron took a baton strike across the shoulder and nearly fell. Tessa screamed as one recovery round punched through the cell door inches from Leo's face. Ghost hit the glass again and again. The recovery team was through the lower bin now. 10 more seconds, and the white chamber would become a coffin. Mason made the only choice that left a road open. Authorize pursuit access, he said. The panel chimed. The far wall of the chamber split, revealing a descending passage full of steam, red light, and the roar of moving water. The glass around Mason dropped at once. Ghost hit him full force the second it cleared. Mason caught the dog, spun, and drove through the opening. Aaron stumbled after him. Tessa emerged with Leo in her arms. Nathan half fell through last, one hand sliding red down the wall. The chamber sealed behind them. Not fast enough. Recovery rounds chewed through the closing seam. One hit Aaron high in the vest and threw him against the wet concrete. Another smashed a pipe, filling the passage with boiling mist. The path dropped around exposed pumps into a long graded catwalk over a black surge basin, where floodwater churned below giant maintenance fans. The train thunder was louder here. They were close. Leo pointed ahead through the steam. That way! The lady took Mom that way! Aaron looked down at him sharply. Your mother's alive? Leo nodded once. Mason saw the look that crossed Aaron's face. Hope and pain at once. Another child. Another leverage point. Another branch. Mara's voice reached them through tunnel speakers mounted over the catwalk. You always did move well under pressure. Elias was right about that. Mason shouted into the steam. Show yourself. A dry laugh answered. At the next gate. Nathan braced himself on the rail, lungs shredding under effort. The wet room splits in two. One path reaches the drop. The other reaches sedation wash. Tessa stared at him. Which one goes to the train? Nathan opened his mouth. Leo answered first. The red doors, he said. Everyone turned. The child pointed through the steam at a junction ahead where two blast doors waited beneath color strips. One blue, one red. Mom said blue is for sleepy people, Leo whispered. Red is for the ones they keep. Nathan closed his eyes once. He's right. The catwalk shook. Below them, the surge basin gates opened wider. Black water frothed up through the grating. The whole wet room had become a moving throat trying to swallow them before they reached the junction. Ghost stopped dead and barked toward the steam beyond the red door. Mason saw it a heartbeat later. A lift cage stood waiting at the red junction platform, lit from within. And inside it, one hand resting casually on the rail, stood Elias Vale himself. No rifle. No armor. No hurry. Just a dark coat and Mason's own face aged into something colder. He smiled as if his son had finally arrived where he had always intended him to be. Then he raised a dead man trigger in his palm. Behind Mason, the sealed white chamber exploded inward from the recovery side. Aaron hit the catwalk hard. Tessa nearly lost Leo over the rail. Nathan vanished in steam and falling metal. The surge basin gates below roared fully open. And the catwalk under Mason's boots began to collapse section by section into the black water beneath. Ghost launched first. The shepherd hit Mason's hip hard enough to throw him toward the last section of grating still holding. Aaron caught Tessa with one arm and Leo with the other, but the next catwalk panel sheared away beneath them and vanished into the surge basin in a burst of black spray. Nathan reappeared through the steam on one knee, one hand locked around a red emergency cable hanging from the ceiling. "Jump the gap!" he shouted. Mason measured it in one glance. Too far for Leo. Barely possible for the others. Elias stood on the far platform with a dead man trigger in his palm, smile unchanged. Then he pressed it halfway. The red blast door behind him began to descend. Ghost barked and looked past Elias, not at him. Mason followed the dog's line through steam and red light. Inside the lift cage stood Mara. And chained beside her was a woman Leo recognized before anyone else could. He screamed one word. "Mom!" Leo's scream tore through the wet room harder than the collapse did. "Mom!" For one suspended second, even Elias Vale turned his head. That was all Mason needed. "Go!" he shouted. Aaron moved first, because fathers already half lost do not wait for better plans. He shoved Tessa and Leo toward the last stable section of catwalk, grabbed the red emergency cable Nathan was hanging from, and swung out over the collapsing gap in a wild arc. Water roared under him. Steam burned his face. Leo screamed his mother's name again as Aaron hit the far platform shoulder first and rolled hard. Elias fired. Not a gunshot. A compressed dart from a sleeve launcher hidden under his coat. The needle struck Aaron high in the arm before he could rise. He tore it free instantly, but Mason saw the clear fluid flash under the red light and knew it mattered. Ghost launched across the gap next. The shepherd did not clear it cleanly. One hind leg clipped the breaking edge of the catwalk, but momentum and fury carried him onto the far platform anyway. He hit Elias at knee height and drove the older man backward into the lift rail with a crack of bone and steel. Mara did not flinch. She stood inside the lift cage in a dark gray archive coat, one hand still on the control panel, the other resting near the chain fixed to the woman beside her. Leo's mother was thinner than she should have been, wrists bound in front, a bruise fading along one cheek, but her eyes were alive and blazing with recognition. "Leo!" she cried. That sound nearly broke the room. Mason grabbed Tessa by the forearm and pointed across the gap. "Take the boy!" Tessa stared at the collapsing grating, then at the child, then back at Mason. Fear lost. She seized Leo and jumped with him before courage could think itself dead. Aaron, already one-kneed and fighting the drug burning through his arm, lunged forward and caught both of them against the platform wall. One family landed. Nathan had not moved. He still hung from the emergency cable above the black surge basin, boots scraping air, old body shaking with effort. Steam washed over him. He looked from Mason to the far platform to the sealed red lift, and understood what the geometry had become. There was one jump left. One shot of timing. One wrong second from losing everyone. Recovery fire burst out of the blown chamber behind them. Rounds struck the catwalk rail and sent sparks into the vapor. Mason dropped flat by reflex, then rose into the only path left, forward. He jumped. For one stomach-emptying instant, black water and metal teeth moved beneath him. Then his boots hit the final grating panel before the gap. The panel snapped downward under his weight. Ghost barked once on the far side, saw him dropping short, and did the impossible again. The dog lunged back toward the gap, caught Mason's sleeve in his teeth, and gave just enough backward force for Mason's free hand to slam onto the edge of the platform rail instead of empty air. His shoulder nearly tore out of socket. Aaron dropped beside him and grabbed his wrist with his good arm. Together, man, dog, and the part of Mason that refused graves, they hauled him over the lip. The catwalk section behind him vanished into the surge basin. Near escape. Near reunion. Near enough to hurt. Elias was still alive. Ghost had torn his coat and bloodied one leg, but the man had rolled clear with the cold efficiency of someone who expected pain and had learned to budget for it. He came up against the far wall, dead man trigger still in hand, one trouser leg red now, where Ghost's teeth had found flesh. Mara's gaze never left Mason. She had his eyes. That landed harder now, up close, under red emergency light, with steam peeling across her face and Leo's mother chained beside her. The resemblance was not perfect. It was worse than that. Intimate. Unmistakable. One branch split into two people made into different weapons. "You took your time," she said. Mason aimed at Elias first. "Open the cage." Leo, clinging to Tessa, was shaking so hard his breath came in hiccuping sobs. "Mama, mama, mama." His mother pressed one bound hand against the glass. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." Aaron tried to stand and nearly dropped again. The sedative was hitting fast. His pupils had begun to widen. Sweat stood on his forehead despite the cold. He hid it from Leo by gripping the rail like he meant to crouch there on purpose. Nathan still hung over the basin. "No one is opening anything until he's up," Mason said. Elias smiled faintly. "That is what I admire about you. Catastrophically misallocated priorities." Mason put a round into the concrete 2 inches from his shoe. "Try me." Ghost bared his teeth and moved one step left, cutting off Elias's angle to the platform ladder. The dog's chest heaved. One hind leg was beginning to tremble from the bad landing, but he held the line like he had been built for nothing else. Mara finally spoke again, but not to Mason. "Nathan," she said into the steam over the basin, "you always did make ruin look paternal." The old man swung once on the emergency cable, found the maintenance ladder with one boot, and locked onto it with a sound ripped from old lungs. "You don't get to talk to me about fathers," he rasped. The words hit Mara harder than her expression allowed. That told Mason something important. Beneath the archive coat and the control voice, something in her still bled. Recovery fire came again from behind the steam gap. Closer now. They had reached the broken edge of the catwalk. No more time. Mason looked at the lift control panel inside the cage and then at the chain around Leo's mother's wrist. "Why her?" Mara answered with clinical calm that sounded practiced rather than natural. "Because leverage stabilizes branch behavior." Leo remained volatile until maternal reinforcement was reintroduced. Leo's mother shut her eyes, like the sentence itself had touched her. Aaron went dead still. There it was again, the machine's language laid over human ruin. Mason shifted the pistol toward Mara. "And me?" This time the answer took a breath. "You destabilized by surviving without supervision," she said. "Elias wanted retrieval. I wanted observation." "That's not an answer." "No," Mara said. "It's the truest one you're going to get before the next collapse." As if on cue, the platform jolted. The surge basin gates below were widening again. The black water climbed higher beneath the grating. Nathan reached the top of the ladder and collapsed onto the platform edge just as a new klaxon began pulsing overhead. Transfer spine clearance lost. Manual detach required. Elias's expression changed for the first time. Not fear. Calculation disrupted. Mara looked sharply at the lift panel. "What?" The system repeated itself. Manual detach required. Tessa understood first. "The train lost bridge alignment." Nathan, on hands and knees, looked up through steam and pain. "Because the patriarchal transfer didn't complete." Mason caught it instantly. The archive had expected him to fully assume command back in the White Chamber. He had only open pursuit access. Enough to chase. Not enough to legitimize the move. The whole transfer spine was now in conflict. Near resolution twisted. They had reached the lift. They had found Leo's mother. But the machine under the mountain no longer knew whose blood it was obeying. Mara saw the same possibility in the same instant. Her hand moved toward a recessed lever inside the cage wall. Ghost launched before she could touch it. The shepherd hit the glass door hard enough to crack it but not break through. Mara stumbled back. Leo's mother used the opening she had been waiting for. She drove her bound hands into Mara's throat and slammed her against the panel. Elias shouted, "Mara!" Everything broke at once. Aaron lunged for the cage release. Tessa dragged Leo back from the platform edge. Nathan reached for the dead man trigger in Elias's wounded hand. Mason fired at the lift glass. The round starred the panel. Not enough. Mara, choking and furious, ripped the emergency lever down. The lift floor dropped 6 inches with a scream of machinery, then locked into manual hang mode directly over the surge basin. Leo's mother lost her footing and crashed against the inside rail. Mara caught the chain fixed to her wrist and wrapped it once around her own forearm like an anchor. Then Mara looked straight through the cracked glass at Mason and gave him the twist with a smile that belonged to the archive more than to blood. "If you break the cage," she said, "she falls with me." And below the hanging lift, the black water surged upward around something huge rising from the basin, something metallic, segmented, and unmistakably shaped like the roof of another train carriage coming back up toward them. The mountain was not done choosing which family it meant to keep and which to drown. The carriage roof burst out of the black surge waters and slammed the hanging lift from beneath. Steel screamed. Glass cracked wider. Leo's mother hit the inner rail. Mara tightened the chain around her wrist. Elias clung to the platform edge with one hand and the dead man trigger in the other. Aaron swayed under the sedative. Nathan bled on one knee. Ghost braced at the edge, for wet and dark, growling into the spray. Then Leo screamed, "Mom!" That cry cut through every alarm in the wet room. Mason moved before a thought could catch up. He holstered the pistol and ran the last steps to the collapsing edge. Ghost launched first, striking the slanted side of the swaying lift and somehow finding purchase. Mason jumped after him, landed hard on the slick roof of the rising carriage, slid on oil and black water, then drove himself toward the cracked lift door. Inside, Mara saw him coming and smiled with terrible calm. "You always choose the bleeding thing," she said. Mason gripped the split seam and hauled. The cage swung over the basin. Below him, the train carriage kept rising, emergency strips along its spine flashing red and white. Leo's mother shoved against Mara with both bound hands. Mara slammed her into the rail and pulled the chain tighter. "If you break the door," Mara called through the crack, "she falls first." Mason pulled harder. "Then let go." That answer hit her harder than resistance. Ghost barked and rammed one paw into the broken glass. It spidered wider. Leo's mother used the opening instantly, kicking Mara's wrapped elbow with everything she had. Something popped. Mara screamed. The chain loosened. Mason ripped the gap wide enough to jam one arm through, but the cage swung again and threw them all sideways. Ghost lost his footing and would have slid into the basin if Mason had not caught the harness strap with his free hand. Above them on the platform, Nathan tore the trigger from Elias's grip. Elias struck him in the throat. Nathan fell. The trigger skidded across wet steel and stopped at Aaron's knees. Aaron stared at it, not because he doubted what it was, because he understood what it meant. Elias turned toward him with blood on one trouser leg where Ghost had bitten through the coat. "Give me that!" Aaron looked at Leo instead. The boy was pressed against Tessa, shaking, staring at his mother trapped in the swaying cage and his father on his knees in front of a choice built like a weapon. The sedative was eating through Aaron's muscles now. Sweat stood on his face. One hand had already begun to fail. Nathan found enough air to force out one sentence. "Don't let him write the ending." Aaron picked up the trigger. Then he smiled. Weakly. Fiercely. Like a man who had been dead on paper too long to be intimidated by one more threat. "No," he said. "You don't get his son." And he hurled the trigger into the black basin. For the first and final time, Elias lost control of his face. He lunged after it. Ghost saw the move before any human did. The shepherd ripped free of Mason's grip, launched from the carriage roof to the platform, and hit Elias at the hips. Both slammed against the edge. Elias clutched the rail. Ghost kept his teeth in the sleeve. Mason got Leo's mother halfway through the broken lift door. Mara still had the chain. She wrapped it around Mason's forearm and yanked with a strength born from rage and old conditioning. Up close, she looked less like a villain than the worst possible outcome of survival inside the archive. "You left me here," she hissed. Mason stared into his own eyes, made colder. "I didn't know you existed." "No," she spat back. "You were allowed not to know." The train beneath him groaned. The carriage hatch was cycling. If the hanging lift did not clear, it would slam into the basin wall and tear apart with everyone inside it. Leo's mother felt the motion too. She looked from Mason to Mara and made the choice before either sibling did. She drove her bound wrists into the emergency chain release mounted beside the rail. The pin snapped. The chain came free. All three of them lurched. Mason hauled Leo's mother out onto the carriage roof. Mara grabbed for the rail and missed. For one sickening second, she hung half out of the lift, one hand clawing empty air. Mason caught her wrist. Everything stopped in that grip. Blood. Steam. Recognition. Hate. One family hanging over a black machine built to store the others. Mara looked up at him, and whatever clinical distance had shaped her voice was gone. "Don't let him keep the branches," she said. "Not save me. Not brother. The truth." Then the carriage jerked forward. The hanging lift slammed sideways into a concrete pillar. Mason's grip tore loose. Mara vanished between steel and spray. For one heartbeat, there was only the roar of the train. Then Ghost barked from the platform. Mason looked up. Elias still hung over the basin by one hand. Ghost had slipped back just enough to keep his own footing, but not enough to release the coat. Aaron, swaying badly now, dragged Leo behind a pillar as Nathan staggered toward the edge. The old man hanging over the water looked up at Mason. Not Nathan. Not Mara. Mason. Even now, with the archive failing around him, that was who he chose. "Mason," Elias said. "You are mine." The sentence emptied the room. Not a theory. Not a hint. Not blood inferred from machines. The source. Mason climbed from the carriage roof onto the platform. Ghost released the coat only when Mason reached the edge himself. Elias's fingers slipped on the wet rail. He was still calculating. Mason saw it in the eyes they shared. "If you pull me up," Elias said, "I can stop the next train." Mason looked past him at Leo in Aaron's arms, at Leo's mother crawling toward them, at Tessa bleeding from the shoulder and still aiming the dead diver's weapon down the tunnel, at Nathan barely upright, and at Ghost shaking but standing anyway. Then he looked back down at the man over the black water. "You built this place to make people choose blood over love," Mason said. Elias smiled through blood. "And here you are." Mason knelt. For one impossible second Elias believed him. Then Mason pried his fingers off the rail one by one. "No," Mason said. "Here I am choosing everyone you buried." Elias fell. The basin took him. The train took the rest. Silence did not come after. The archive still existed somewhere below and beyond. More rooms. More branches. More names. But something foundational had broken with him. Aaron collapsed fully then, the sedative finally winning. Leo's mother reached him before his head struck steel. Leo threw himself across both of them, sobbing so hard his whole body shook. Tessa dropped beside them and found Aaron's pulse with bloody fingers. "Still here," she breathed. Nathan sank against the rail and looked suddenly every year he had survived in the machine. Mason turned to him, questions burning, but Nathan only shook his head. "Later." Then his eyes moved to Ghost. The shepherd stood between Mason and the basin, chest heaving, one hind leg shaking, ears slowly lifting now that the thing holding the room together through fear had finally snapped. Mason crouched and put both hands into the wet fur of the dog's neck. Ghost leaned into him. Not because training demanded it, because he chose to. That mattered now more than any file, any archive label, any lie hidden in a surname. Sirens sounded faintly above. Real ones. Too late for the mountain. In time for the living. Nathan heard them too and gave a ruined smile. "Your mother won once," he whispered. "You got out." Mason looked at Leo with both parents around him, at Tessa crying without noticing, at the tunnel where more trains still ran, and finally at Ghost. "No," he said. "She bought me time." Dawn was beginning to bleed through fracture vents when rescue crews cut down into the facility from above. Medics took Aaron first. Then Leo's mother. Then Nathan, cursing the stretcher the whole way. Tessa handed over dead diver credentials, lift codes, and every name she could remember between tremors. Mason stayed with Ghost until the dog was on oxygen and still trying to stand anyway. As the first clean light reached the platform, Nathan looked over from the stretcher and said, "You're not what he made." Mason met his eyes, then looked at the family clinging together a few feet away, and at the dog who had pointed to the cave and refused to leave the truth buried there. "No," Mason said. And under the sirens, under the cooling steam, under every lie that had tried to name him before he could name himself, Mason finally understood why Ghost had pointed at the cave and refused to move. The dog had not found a place. He had found the scene where the truth was still breathing. Now, for the first time since the mission that broke his life, the answer felt complete. "I'm what survived him."